On the afternoon of July 4th, Nolan Wells vanished on Horn Island, leaving behind a forensic timeline that exposes a calculated deception. While mainstream networks fixate on a simple boat engine failure, they completely miss the forensic anomalies proving why they ran. The missing hours of Nolan Wells contain a terrifying sequence of events, a sequence I am going to deconstruct piece by piece, leading to a biometric anomaly that shatters the official narrative entirely. The foundational alibi for the passengers of the Triton relies entirely on a catastrophic mechanical failure. The surviving friends claim the bilge pump on the Triton failed, forcing the vessel to rapidly take on water and flee Horn Island at exactly 4:31 in the afternoon. They claim Nolan Wells simply wandered off and voluntarily stayed behind. Every piece of this story has an innocent explanation in isolation, but when accepting the innocent explanation requires you to ignore the entire sequence of events, it stops being the most likely answer. Let us stack the maritime evidence. Any marine vessel experiencing a genuine sinking event in the Gulf Coast is federally mandated to broadcast a Mayday distress signal over VHF Marine Radio Channel 16. Yet the United States Coast Guard transmission logs from July 4th reveal absolute radio silence from the Triton. We must look at what did not happen. The absence of this federal call is not a panic-induced mistake. The absence is a deliberate operational window. Instead of broadcasting a federally recorded emergency maritime distress call, the passengers of the Triton bypassed the Coast Guard entirely and made a standard, unrecorded cellular call to a private tow company named Sea-Tow. Mississippi Department of Marine Resources data confirms the Triton was eventually towed for 3 miles. Yet the private Sea-Tow dispatch commander explicitly states their company never actually arrived to assist the Triton. No federal distress call, no verified private tow, no immediate rescue. Who actually towed the Triton through the 3-hour timeline gap? And why did the Triton passengers deliberately avoid leaving a federally recorded radio transmission? The mechanical failure was not an accident. The mechanical failure was a weaponized decoy designed to establish a documented departure time, allowing the Triton to flee the area without federal oversight. This brings us to the crowdsourced metadata compiled by the United Cajun Navy. Hidden within 20 pages of leaked photographs from the shoreline of Horn Island is the exact geographical coordinate of a violent physical confrontation. The photographic metadata proves an altercation occurred on the extreme eastern ridge of Horn Island, a highly dangerous geographical zone featuring a severe 42-foot underwater drop-off. This zone is located nearly 2 miles away from where the Triton originally dropped anchor. Javon Williams, a close confidant, confirmed Nolan Wells would never wander miles away from the primary vessel alone. So how did Nolan Wells end up at the epicenter of a hostile physical extraction zone on the eastern ridge, exactly 30 minutes after the Triton falsely claimed a mechanical emergency? The geographical deception deepens when we map the physical evidence against natural offshore conditions. The physical body of Nolan Wells was recovered 2 days later in a location that mathematically defies the natural ocean currents of Horn Island. If Nolan Wells simply succumbed to the water near the eastern ridge, the tidal drift vectors dictate his body would have washed toward the western shallows. Independent oceanographic models confirm the recovery location of Nolan Wells is only physically possible if Nolan Wells entered the water from a completely different vessel, deep in the navigational channel. The Triton rendezvoused with an untraceable phantom vessel in the deep water. Nolan Wells was physically transferred from the eastern ridge of Horn Island onto a secondary boat. Stop and analyze the sheer psychological reality of the timeline gap. If this was a tragic accident, the human brain naturally enters a state of chaotic desperation. But forensic behavioral experts confirm the actions of the Triton passengers display cold, calculated premeditation. Within minutes of returning to the mainland, the Triton passengers did not call the local authorities to report a missing person. They immediately initiated group voice calls on fully encrypted applications like Signal and Telegram. No calls to the police, no calls to the parents of Nolan Wells, no public pleas for help. Why would supposedly innocent friends bypass standard cellular networks to communicate on military-grade encrypted servers before anyone even officially knew Nolan Wells was missing? The digital footprint was systematically eradicated. Direct messages were permanently wiped with military-grade deletion software, and location tracking applications were manually disabled across 7 different mobile devices. But the premeditation extends to before the boat ever left the dock. Investigators discovered the maritime insurance policy and the GPS tracking beacon for the Triton were mysteriously modified and disabled just 72 hours prior to the July 4th excursion. The July 4th trip to Horn Island was not a spontaneous holiday gathering. It was a calculated maritime operation disguised as a teenage party. This brings us to the most dangerous digital anomaly of the entire investigation. The piece of evidence the institutional shield could not erase in time. Horn Island is a documented cellular dead zone. The Triton passengers used this lack of signal to build their impenetrable alibi, claiming nobody could communicate with Nolan Wells after the Triton departed. But digital forensic sweeps reveal a terrifying new layer to the timeline that shatters the alibi entirely. A secondary biometric health monitor linked directly to the physical body of Nolan Wells successfully transmitted a live heartbeat and GPS ping to a mainland tower at exactly 6:14 in the evening. This biometric data proves Nolan Wells was experiencing extreme physiological distress hours after the official timeline claims he was left alone. The data packets indicate the heart rate of Nolan Wells spiked to 160 beats per minute before the signal abruptly flatlined. This ping did not originate from the shallow sands of Horn Island. This transmission originated from open water inside the deep navigational channel. The Triton passengers claimed they left Nolan Wells safely on the beach at 4:31. The biometric ping proves Nolan Wells was in the deep water channel, experiencing a fatal event at 6:14. The autopsy cover-up confirms the presence of a massive institutional protective shield. The state medical examiner immediately sealed the official autopsy findings of Nolan Wells. When the family of Nolan Wells hired forensic pathologist Dr. Roger Mitchell for an independent review, Dr. Mitchell discovered a deeply disturbing procedural violation. Crucial tissue samples and localized chemical swabs from the lungs of Nolan Wells were intentionally retained by the state, legally blocking Dr. Roger Mitchell from testing for unauthorized chemical agents or heavy sedatives. The state authorities deliberately starved the independent pathologist of the exact biological evidence required to prove a fatal event occurred. We are no longer looking at a tragic drowning accident. The Nolan Wells timeline is a heavily weaponized cover-up involving manipulated ocean currents, phantom distress calls, encrypted communication networks, and suppressed biometric wearable data. The surviving passengers of the Triton are currently being shielded by a massive legal defense fund, bankrolled to protect the influential families involved in Jackson County. The digital footprint has been erased. The medical evidence has been legally confiscated, but the missing data speaks the loudest. The Jackson County grand jury remains permanently stalled, and the state still refuses to release the unedited audio of the initial CTOW dispatch call. Tell me exactly what you think the unreleased CTOW dispatch audio contains that forced the state to bury it completely. Leave your forensic analysis in the comments below, because I am pulling the most logical theories for the next phase of this investigation.